Oh, God, did I sleep in? I don't think this alarm works in this version. Or any version. That's worth a try. Oh, God, this server's dead. It's always dead. It's always like this. I don't know why I play here anymore. Looks like there's someone in the bath. What's that? Oh, it's an NPC. Okay. What is this? Okay. I see that. I don't... Okay. Hi, I'm Adam, the administrator of Smellycraft, but you can call me Smelly. Today we're going to learn to do that. It's pretty cool, eh? These message boxes will format as much text as you want to throw at them. They'll give the players links to click in web browsers. They'll give the players options for dialogue that they can click on in the menu and automatically chat back, so you can control that with chat triggers from Denizen. They can give you options for tooltips to help guide the players through the lore. There's lots of stuff buried in there. And we're going to take a quick look at the surface level so you can begin to learn to work with it. Now, this script is written for a plugin called Denizen, which you can obtain ideally from MC Monkey's GitHub. I will link you to it, as well as the message constructor library seen there. And Denizen depends on citizens. Denizen uncovers a lot more functionality than citizens. It's basically script on steroids. It does, if you're familiar with script, everything script does and more. So you would probably expect citizens to depend on Denizen, but that's not the way it is yet. Install all three. First you do citizens and then Denizen in your main plugins folder, and then once you have those jars run and they've created their own config folders, you can insert the message constructor library here into your Denizen/scripts folder. And then once you've done that, you're ready to reload, and Denizen should have access to the functions it provides. So let's take a look at some first steps we need to take as some best practices when working with these scripts. Alright, here we have Anthony's message constructor library. This is something we're going to want to make a couple of changes to right away. This MCL events section will actually crash your server because it's trying to connect to web pages that don't exist anymore, and we have to get rid of that right away. Fortunately, it doesn't do anything super important. It's for updates and metrics, and we can definitely live without that. So we'll move on after saving our file, and I want to go over some of the definitions here for the script message box. In the intro, you saw the boxed message. That's how we did this. And it does accept 8 arguments, 8 definitions in a list here. So there are some that basically explain themselves. You don't need me to tell you what title, subtitle, page width, or page height do. A script is sort of like a namespace from what I can tell. The documents don't really make it clear what that's for to me. Maybe you'll figure it out. And if you decide it's of use to you, you can include that the same way I included the headers and some of the other functions here, just as a flag. You can set it as a flag, similarly to how I did in some of my, you see here I set chat header 2 as a player flag. I would simply set the author namespace, or they just call it author in MCL, and use it that way, passing it to this function by adding the player.flag here, as you see me doing now. So you can do that yourself. I hard-coded it because I don't intend to use that function, but it is provided in the MCL library if you can figure out what it does. It seems to be a way of attributing credit to the authors of longer scripts. So moving on, we have here command and page. Now those two work together in a fashion where command, for us, we'd specify that it would be paginate, and when the player clicks page 2, it'll issue this command as the player to the server for us, therefore advancing to the next page. Depending on how we code our command, it's completely custom behavior. This plugin actually leaves the pagination behavior to you, and I've coded it here for you beforehand. Now, if you do want to add your own arguments to that, you can. So for example, if you do want to say maybe you're going to pass the author name in this way instead of using a flag, maybe you want for some reason to use an argument, then you would actually have to modify this to use the first argument, because remember, message constructor library always appends the page number to the end of the command you provided. So it's always going to do that. We can't change that behavior. It is a limitation we have to work around. And I'm going to modify this first call to use the actual call for the first flag And we have to add that back to the command portion here, which will feed the argument back into the command as it's reused. Now the great thing about Denizen is, and we're going to update this so that the page number is actually at the end, found at the end where it is. The great thing about Denizen is it actually fills these flags, these tags, while it runs them. So most languages will actually decide what variables should express to what when it loads a script, when it loads a file, and then it just stops. But Denizen, as it loads these lines, as it runs through these lines, will continue refilling these tags with their current appropriate values. So this will actually preserve this text here, and it will always reappear as the page advances. So I used it in the first argument as an example for passing an author name. That's actually a function better suited to a flag, but if you can think of a way to use extra arguments, that's how you would pass them, is just make sure they go in the middle and always account for the page number here to be at the end, because that's where MCL will put it. So I don't have to explain a wide variety of these because there are great tutorials already on Denizen. I linked to them. But we're going to go into the game now and actually take a look at how it behaves. Let's go get sworn in. Alright, here we are at the courthouse. Time to go take our oaths and become a accredited player of Smellycraft. We're going to approach the bench and trigger the proximity chat. Here he is. And see already he's got a couple of pages, and I've managed to put some coloration tags in there too. Not just in the headers, but also in the text. And you can see some line breaks. I'll show you how in a moment. So at the second page, we encounter a couple of options we can provide the players. Now these are chat triggers within Denizen. It's going to make me say some text, but you don't actually output that to the trigger. In the message constructor library, you only need to use a single word. In this case, it's oaths. And the word oaths triggers the entire phrase and the next sentence, and you can see that in the code. Plenty of tutorials on that from Alex Goodwin. Now, the explanation is just there in case the lore is too much for you. I figured I would throw those in for my server in case I wanted to talk plain English from admin to player, in case maybe, Cato the Younger wasn't doing it for them. If it leaves them confused, and something heavy in lore always can be confusing, you have those ways of getting through that without breaking your immersion. Maybe you'll think of something craftier. So I'll show you how it gets through the tutorial here. Clicking on these pages will trigger more chat triggers, and they can be any length. You see this one has 3 pages because I added more entries to that particular message box to call. Even though these are 3 pages, if you remember, they're all one call to the message box script, to which we supplied 8 flags, 8 definitions, sorry, and the final definition in that list is the entries. Now, the entries are actually definitions 8 and beyond, because entries are separated with the pipe character. If you hold shift and press the button above enter, you'll get the pipe. That is also how you separate entries in the definition list. So I'll show you what I mean in the code once we get to the end of this tutorial here. The tutorial within the tutorial. And finally, we're agreeing to the last rules here. So you can see that he accepts me, gives me the visa, some text comes on screen after a short delay. And normally, if I hadn't had myself as an admin already, you would see a resident shovel and some free beef pop up in the hotbar there for the new players. And of course, as I leave, he gives me his warmest wishes. So let's take a look at how that was actually done. Alright, so here we are back on the judge. We'll go over the flow of his conversation now that you've seen it and have some context for what this code is doing. You see we started with the proximity trigger as we approached the bench. And without repeating too much of the content from Alex Goodwin's Denizen tutorials, I'll just go over the basics here. The chat trigger takes over from where the proximity trigger left us the oaths keyword, and it picks up on that. And then we do see some linkage forming here, so the words between the slashes actually listen for the text that the player's message chat function outputs. Even though they see the word yes, the player says the word property because of how message chat works. The next trigger picks up on that because it's put into slashes, and then we continue with the chain here. So that gets all the way down through the tutorial, and then we begin using some extra Denizen code that you can easily learn to modify their player groups, to give them certain items from a CMI kit, give them some beef, a shovel for residents, and some nice text to welcome them to the player here. This is a broadcast, to welcome them to the server rather. So this is a broadcast instead of a player message. Everybody will hear that. Zap 2, as other tutorials from Denizen will tell you, just takes them to a second conversation next time they meet. You'll stay in step 2 after that, so you should never really have to hear the tutorial again. But you can code fallbacks if in case something breaks here like I have. So these chat entries, I mentioned earlier that they were separated by pipes, and you can see those in the code here. that is a line break. So whenever you want to start a new line, place one of those in. Maybe it's after a couple of run-on sentences, or maybe it's time to supply the player options for feedback. You probably want their options to appear below, as mine did. So I always place a pipe before I do any option, and right afterwards too. So all the options appear on different lines. So that's everything I think I need to know about Message Constructor Library. If you need to know more, Denizen has a great Discord channel. They're the ones who found it for me. And I definitely look forward to our next lesson. Be well.